Hello, and welcome to the latest edition of the Border Chronicles audio interview series. One of the reasons that I wanted to interview Isabel Garcia is that I thought there would be no better person who could assess the first year of the Biden administration in terms of the border. After all, Isabel Garcia is one of the co founders of the Coalición de Derechos Humanos, a grassroots organization that has been fighting border militarization since 1993, and that's the year that Operation Hold the Line was implemented. Isabel's been on the front lines even before that. She's been doing this work since 1976. So she brings a profound historic perspective and one full of a lot of wisdom and insight. In the interview, she takes us on a journey through the first year of the Biden administration, discusses the continuation of the militarization of the U.S. Mexico border and its impacts. She does discuss Title 42 as well. And she also brings in a more historic perspective, looking at the bipartisan nature of the decades long fortification of the border. And she stresses that these historic perspectives are super important as we discuss the border and try to find a way forward. And by historic perspectives, she definitely means the border history, but she also means immigration history, looking back centuries, and labor history, among other histories, including that of U.S. foreign policy. In all that, she offers advice around a border policy or how we could proceed going forward. In that she does include an examination of U.S. foreign policy and seeing if any of our policies have caused displacement in other countries and to change such policies. She also recommends that there be a legalization of all non-citizens in the country, and finally, a demilitarization of the border. And here comes her decades of wisdom. It bubbles up to the top when she says that the border itself could be, quote unquote, one of the most beautiful places in the world. But what it will take, and you should listen on to hear her reasoning, her insight, and her knowledge when she says that it will take a quote unquote quiet revolution. Please listen in. Thank you. Isabel Garcia, thank you so much for spending the time with me today. It's really an honor to be with you. I think I just want to get started by asking you, we're almost a year into the Biden administration. There was a lot of talk about, the transition from Trump to Biden, how potential solutions, quote unquote, to the border would be found in such a transition. And now, after, nearly a year of watching things happen, what is your assessment of what's happened? No, first, I guess we'll just start with what have you observed? What have you seen? What are some of the insights that you've had about what's happened, especially on the border?
Thank you for having me to discuss this really important issue. I like many just felt overwhelming sense of relief that Trump was no longer in. I mean, I could go off on the many things that would continue and be increased. So all of us are still breathing a sigh of relief. But those of us that have fought for many years against the very policies that we see entrenched, of course, have to make an honest assessment. And it's not very difficult. It's not as if we had told people, Biden is the answer to all, or any of the Democrats have never been the answer to our immigration or border issues ever. And so going in, while we are very glad at the tone, the tenor of the discussion, that's really important. Whether it's even if it's not concretely in a law, just the tenor of the discussion has been really a very positive thing. But in terms of policy, of course, we have to dive in right away because we were on fire. And we expected Biden to come in and really address these issues in a more systematic way. And so my first assessment and criticism is two words: stay home. Stay home is no longer a valid policy or a directive for our country to tell anybody, to the South in particular, right? And so we see that Biden, even though he has attempted to deal with the issue of asylum at the border, the MPP, the keep people into Mexico, and he has attempted, but he went about it the wrong way, and I'm hoping that he does continue. But as a whole, I still think that they should have been much stronger in making the case for protection of asylum at our borders, which they have not. Title 42 is an abomination. All of the medical doctors and medical people will tell you, science will tell you, that it's ridiculous. It's wrong assumptions, and yet the Biden administration continues with it, hurting so many people in it.
Could you explain what Title 42 is?
Title 42 is really an obscure section in one of our statutes that allows for basically the closing of borders. I wish I had the exact language. Closing of borders to attend to really emergent issues. I mean, we have not utilized Title 42 in this fashion. What can I say? And since scientists and medical people have completely debunked this, Title 42 should not be utilized as a way to preclude, in particular, asylees. Biden has been very weak on the issue of asylum. Vice President Harris went south and just said, stay home, without giving an indication of any realization or acknowledgement of policy failures, of all of the impending issues, and how our history with those nations has to be addressed in order to do anything appropriately. So when that was missing, I mean, we weren't surprised, but again, we were hurt. There's been a complete lack of inclusion of the migrant voices in regards to any of the issues, whether it's receiving services as essential workers. They were left out. How can they be left out when migrants have been the essential backbone of this nation for hundreds, a couple hundred years here? The death rate on the border has increased, if anything. Why? Because, as we've said over 20 years ago, 30 years ago, that as we militarize a border, the more death there will be. As we militarize the border, there will be all of the ambiguous death, right? 60-some percent, 70% of people that will never know what happened to their loved one.
Can I ask you a question? Have we seen a further militarization of the border under the Biden administration?
Yes. And again, we observe what's going on. Have I seen a dramatic shift from this administration to say we should stop militarizing the border? We should assess our policies. We should assess the Border Patrol as an agency and how effective, how violent it is. None of that has come about under Secretary Mayorkas, and especially under Biden. I think he has an opportunity to educate the public, and they have not. And so the border continues to be militarized. They claim we did stop some of the horrific damage done by the Trump administration, but we have to acknowledge that in the state of Arizona, Sonora, we saw more destruction than any other place. We saw destruction that cannot be remediated in any real way. I mean, it's devastating. And this administration is now prosecuting a young Tohono O'odham activist for standing in front of those bulldozers while the Trump administration was enacting its horrific policy on the border. I expected those charges to be dropped, for the Biden administration to look at his U.S. attorneys and their priorities, particularly along the border, and he has not.
Could you explain what happened that day with that Tohono O'odham activist you just mentioned?
Yes, in I believe early January of this year, two young Tohono O'odham women activists were in the area of the Quito Springs, which is incredible treasure, of course, along the desert here, and very important to the Tohono O'odham nation as a whole. And they were exercising their religious rights. They heard the commotion. They've known. Of course, we've all been active in monitoring what's going on with the destruction and crying. If I cried over fallen saguaros and what I saw with my eyes, I can just imagine the hurt in the Tohono O'odham people who had to see this destruction. And so this young woman is still being prosecuted under the Biden administration. So as he touts more progressive sounding policies, yes, he has supported the dreamers as a whole. Yes, they're not going wholesale after them. And I commend them for that, but ICE is still alive. ICE is still actively chasing people. Issuing notices of appearances for deportation. I just read recently over 78,000 were issued to asylees that they want them to present themselves, put ankle bracelets, and be set up for deportation. And that's the other thing. If they continue to have this deportation arm and litigation, it is high time that Biden say once and for all, every person that is subject to deportation must be assigned an attorney. Because without an attorney, you have absolutely no rights. You don't know how to exercise your rights. My teacher, tax professor at the university years ago told me the only area that is as regulated as we are, is complex, is immigration law. Because you don't just go to the statute, you have to go to the Code of Federal Regulation. And so it's a very complicated area of the law where people are being basically going to be banished from the country forever. And across them sits an attorney who is specialized in this area of the law, that is organized office, so it has many resources, in front of a judge who's going to make these decisions without assisting you and then asking you to defend yourself. And so not as an elitist that other people can defend themselves, but not if you do not know the rules and the laws of this country. We call ourselves a nation of laws, and the rule of law being it, and yet we don't do that.
Yeah, so you said that 78,000 people who are asking for asylum are being let into the country but detained with ankle, or could you just explain?
Yes, some of the people that came into the country were not able to process them the way they wanted to and have ankle bracelets put. They issued them a notice to appear somewhere else, not an official notice to appear, but a notice to go to the nearest ICE and present yourself, and they're telling them you are going to be subject to either, detention or some kind of restriction. And that's in addition to the people they have in custody. I'm just saying, out of the people that they claim, just today they issued 78,000. So there's many more. But my point being that we continue to finance a very expensive operation that uses taxpayer money and causes only suffering, does not address the issues of migration in the least. You know, they continue to militarize. Even if they've stopped some of the wall building, they've continued with their smart technology and every way to create a border. They want a border, one way or another. And so Democrats and Republicans alike, I've voted Democrat all my life and continue to, but I have no, notion that, that the Democrats are very responsible as well for the militarization of this border and for the ignoring of root causes, particularly from our policies.
Could you explain in what ways you've seen the Democrats as responsible or partly responsible for the militarization of the border?
Okay, well, I'll have to, age myself. But since 1976, we have been fighting for immigrant rights. I was a young woman. And we have fought within the Democratic Party. Of course, we're progressive and such. And we have fought the Democratic Party over and over and over again on the militarization of this border. Every single bill that comes along, whether it was Simpson-Mazzoli, Simpson-Rodino, whether it's the Strive Act, it doesn't matter what decade. It has been proposed by Democrats as a compromise, and always compromising what? Obviously compromising the border, in addition to other things, but definitely utilizing the border as a negotiation point. I mean, I was involved in discussions with the top Hispanic leadership of the time that argued if we don't support militarization of the border, we will not get any legalization. And I argued to them, we're going to get only militarization because you conceded with the right that we need militarization. They challenged you on the legalization, so do we have an additional visa? No. We do not, by policy, have one additional visa. Do we have more militarization? Yes, we do. And so decade after decade after decade, we have seen the same response from the Democrats. I am awaiting for the leadership of the youth, of the dreamers in particular, to take us to a new era where we will stop this, not only is it a plundering of our precious money, but the damage that we're doing is incalculable, right? Both to families on the little level, whether we have a social death, right? When you deport the father or the mother and the children are left to be raised by a telephone, through FaceTime, with an uncle or an aunt, and so that's social death that we're responsible for too. And so we want more from Biden. We expect that he can begin to really talk about these issues. We think it's complicated, but it's not that complicated for them to sit down and discuss and to say, look, people from Honduras have been trying to come here because of our policies of supporting horrific governments in Honduras, in Guatemala, in El Salvador. Well, the policies that we've engaged in Mexico that have produced the very migration that we hate, that we love to hate, not only hate. And yet migrants continue to build, and build, which is why many people after the 2008, collapse, that they compared other countries to the United States, that we didn't do so bad. Why? Because of the continued migrant labor force, right? We're addicted to cheap labor. And that's why we have migrants in our midst, not because we're humanitarian, because we've depended on them for all this time, And so we also want this administration to take off all of those burdensome requirements for people, right? I mean, well, we can get into the weeds, right? I guess, and we don't have time right now to get into weeds, except to say that we should be honest with the American public. I've always thought we're in the mess we're in because we don't know our major histories. We don't know the history of the genocide of the indigenous people and the land grabs. Why can't we talk about it? Why can't we talk about it? I mean, we can't talk about slavery and post-slavery for some God reasons. We don't talk about the history of labor, I'll tell you that. My father was a labor organizer, right, a union leader, and helped create the Chicano middle class in Arizona with the copper mines and their, unions, and nobody knows the history of labor. And no one knows the history of immigration, and that's really shameful too. Shameful that we don't know how it was really founded, not on this, fairy tales. We can talk about the good things we've done in our country. And I submit that many of the good things that resulted in our country are because of those very struggles that have happened in all of those histories that I just spoke of.
Do you think if we were more aware of those histories, that there would be a different conversation around immigration, around the border? And what do you think that conversation would be?
Oh my goodness, the conversation would be dramatically different. I believe that we must teach K through 12 this history, along with those other 4 histories. We must teach immigration. We claim to be a nation of immigrants. We claim that immigrants from Europe came here to found this country, right? And so why don't we tell the very important history that we were founded on, genocide of indigenous people that are continuing to suffer? And so then we go up to the immigration. I mean, let's go, late 1880s, and, we needed labor force, and so the Chinese immigrants were brought in, and they were brutalized, and, we had lynchings, a major lynching of Chinese immigrants, right? And so it was so anti-Chinese that the public was just in an uproar. They not only did the Chinese Exclusion Act, but they followed it up with, these departmental orders, and they created a departmental order, I think, in 1916 under the Department of Treasury, because they said any industry or person that hires a foreign worker must pay a head tax, a guest worker program, right? Well, that was not liked. So they went to the Department of Treasury and they lobbied until they got what? They got a waiver for who? Mexican immigrants. They got a waiver for Mexican immigrants. Why don't we tell that history? And that we got that waiver for what reason? So we can bring cheap labor. It's a historical fact. You can see it. You can see articles with newspapers, copies of old newspapers with these things. I mean, these are historical facts. In the historical congressional record, you can hear what has been said about Chinese. These are all facts. And if we knew the history, people don't even know that this was part of Mexico. Have I told you?
Where we are right now.
Where we are right now in Arizona. Mm-hmm. People have no idea this area was even Mexico. So, how difficult is that for us? So when people say, well, you don't have such a nice jingle like what don't you get about illegal or stuff like that, I tell them it's not that we don't have catchy phrases, it's that they have an audience that has been steeped in what? This shallow history and know nothing except that they want to take our stuff and they want our way of life and they should go home and, fix their own place, that kind of attitude, right? And so we have no idea that after we took land from the indigenous, we took land then from Mexico in an act of war. And since then, we have been importing Mexicanos. I'm telling you, and then we did, of course, the famous Bracero Act in the, last World War. We had, 2 million crossings at least of over 1 million Mexicanos who were what? Brought into the country because why? We needed them, right? Anytime we've had a war effort, we needed women or we needed immigrants, right? I mean, that's when we relax. And we have a history of that. And so we've created a situation where, of course, industry gets cheap labor and we get restrictive laws that can be imposed whenever the need arises. And then they invoke the restrictive nature. And that's where we've been. Why? Because now we do wars how? We do them by drone and stuff. I mean, things have all changed. There's economic things have changed. I mean, that's the other thing. It's, the economic pressure that has been created in those countries to migrate is huge, and people have no idea. So that's all part of migration. That letter writer that wrote into letter to the editor, why don't these people in the caravans from Honduras instead petition their government in Tegucigalpa? That's the question, right? And so why aren't we answering that question? It should be known. People should know what we've done in those countries. I mean, here we condemn Cuba, we condemn all these countries, and look at Honduras is headed up by a narco-trafficking family that's been indicted in Florida. I mean, it's just an abomination.
So in other words, like for when you think of border issues, they're vast, right? They're extending. You're looking at U.S. policy that's going to places like Honduras and Tegucigalpa and all throughout Central America,
Yes.
so all around the world, really.
Absolutely.
And so when you think of what would be a quote unquote solution, right? There's, for example, with Biden coming in, there's a lot of talk. Oh, we're going to remedy the situation.
Yeah.
But in your view, what would that be if you were in charge? If you could implement a solution, considering all the histories you mentioned, considering all the U.S. policies and the border, the militarization of the border too, how would you envision
it's
it?
such huge thing, but just as a policy thing, and simplistic, it's got to be like in 3 big chunks or something. We've got to address for our policies abroad, whether they be it military, drug, and economic. We have to look at root cause. If we don't look at root cause, then Democrats refuse to look at root cause. Just refuse to deal with root cause and refuse to deal with the militarization. So that means, how about it, dealing with our countries, partner countries, with respect and dignity. You know what these countries have given our country? I mean, a lot anyway, but that goes to the history part, right? But we need to do that. Sit as cooperative partners, not the security and prosperity pact where, the U.S. rules, from here till kingdom come. No, there's got to be respect. You don't want people to migrate? Well, then stop your U.S. dollars from being used in that way to make that family migrate. We've ruined their ability to grow crops in certain areas. They didn't do it, we did, right? And so there has to be that sort of thing. Secondly, I think there has to be a total, legalization of people, regularization of people, period. That's it. Regularization of people, right? There should be a demilitarization of the border with a real emphasis on the border at creating the most beautiful places in the world.
Whoa.
They should be places of radical hospitality and places where stuff happens, where something happens. I mean, all our merges somehow make magic. And there's pain there and stuff. But I think that we could create a magical place with economic engines, that Disney and U.S. interests know what's in Mexico. So why don't we let the people in Mexico and the U.S. people benefit from them versus Disney or GM or, whoever is taking over whatever product that Mexicans used to produce and now the agricultural business. And I mean, it's that kind of thing we have to do, right? But it would require, obviously, a major change in our economic situation, because let's face it, I don't believe that we're really governed by either Democrats or Republicans. It's really, we're a capitalist economy. That's what controls.
So how could that happen? Like what, is there any practical steps that could be taken right here, right now, or?
Yes, I really think that we have to have some kind of quiet revolution. Of course, it's going to be hard in this country because everybody's armed. That's a whole other thing. But I think that, we're talking, people have decided they are going down to really basic things. I'm going to grow some food for our neighborhood, right? We have to. The indigenous people saying we have to survive as indigenous people, right? I think we have to let that creativity really come out, especially in the young people. I think there's a lot of way of governance that can be thought of. It would be deconstructing what we have. It would imagine that. Imagine what it would take to get to that. Because we really can't get to hemispheric cooperation without addressing, the gorillas in the room, right? Mm-hmm. That own everything. Yeah. And they have no patriotism, none. And yet they exude this thing in the country. As it's incredible. As we claim we've globalized, we've made more and more barriers. Well, no, that's a proven fact. Across the world, as you know, more and more barriers have gone up for people as we claim we're more globalized.